up next, we have understanding the board process. So we're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of things. This has been mentioned several times. Know what you're signing up for before you get into it. What are the responsibilities? What are the roles? How does it fit into the whole government process? And so we are fortunate enough today to have Tiffany Albert, who is a municipal clerk with the city of Greenwood, with us here today.
My name is Tiffany Albert, and I am the clerk for the Greenwood City Council. And I thank you all for allowing me to do this presentation in regards to understanding the board process and how they function and who they answer to. So if you don't mind, then we'll just move on to the next slide. So to better understand how boards and committees work, they are formed, you must know their origin. So in my case, city council is the board of directors. Can you move to the next slide, please? The Greenwood City Council is comprised of 7 individuals who are selected by citizens to represent one of 6 wards. Next slide. City Council meets at least twice a month, normally the first and third Mondays, to discuss and consider matters that affect residents. So the mayor is the at-large member who acts as the chairman of this board, and the mayor pro tem is the vice chair. The city manager is responsible for presenting agenda items for council's consideration. Next slide, please. Every first Monday of each month, council has a work session, which is an informal meeting where the city manager and staff relay information that council may consider or vote upon at their formal meeting. Next slide, please. So what you see here is the agenda for last Monday. And in one night, as you can see, council annexed property into the city limits for future residential development. And council gave city manager permission to accept streets and storm sewer in the city's right of way in a new housing development, and approved a list of streets that will be repaired. And lastly, council made an appointment to the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee that we'll talk about shortly. Next slide, please. Because city government must consider a wide range of issues determining the best quality of life for its citizens, it's necessary to receive advisement from groups that specializes in areas relevant to housing, development, and the arts. Those groups are council appointed committees. You move to the next one, please. So according to Robert's Rules of Order, a committee is a body of one or more persons appointed or elected to an assembly or society to consider or investigate or act in regard to certain matters or subjects, or to do all these things. Next slide. City Council appoints members to 4 committees: the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee, Board of Architectural Review, the Planning Commission, and Board of Zoning Appeals. Their purpose is to provide recommendations for City Council to make well-informed decisions. Next slide. So with the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee, we'll start with them. Their duties are to make recommendations to City Council on the expenditure of revenue generated from local tourism. Next slide. So as you see there, you'll see the restaurant and a hotel right there. So the committee is comprised of volunteers representing restaurant and hotel industries located in the city. They meet only once a year in September, and that's when the city received the funds. That's right there. When they receive the funds to review applicants requesting allocations of those funds that the city receives, and they use it for operation costs. So pictured here, you see the Greenwood Theater, the Train Museum, and the South Carolina Festival of Discovery. There are no officers that are nominated to this committee, but a final decision is relayed to the assistant city manager, who then reports their suggestions to city council. You can move on up. So as you can see, that's a sample of the city council agenda where they have made their recommendation. And based on the recommendation, city council votes on a resolution designating funds to those agencies. So if you see to the right, and you'll see the Greenwood Regional Visitors and Tourism and the Art Center of Greenwood, and you see along that list. And so you see the money requested and the money that was recommended and the money that was eventually approved by council. You can move on to the next slide. So those agencies will use those funds for programs, entertainment, and et cetera, to boost local tourism and the local economy. And that's it for the accommodations tax. We're moving on to the Board of Architecture Review, and we call it the BAR for short. So it's established in 2006. This is our newest board. And they recommend to City Council all designations of individual historic properties and historic districts within the city of Greenwood. Regular BAR meetings are scheduled the third Wednesday of each month at 12 o'clock. Okay. And the BAR is comprised of volunteers, which are lawyers or someone who's knowledgeable in real estate law, building design or construction, or representatives of the Historical Society that have an interest in history or architecture. You move to the next one. Their purpose is to keep the historical integrity of the two historic districts in the city of Greenwood. The Uptown Greenwood Historic Overlay, which is the two historic overlays, which you see to the left. And if you look to the right, you will see a picture of the old Main Street. That's an old picture. And the newest picture of Main Street, which is the widest street in South Carolina. And all that has been developed within the past 40 years. So it takes a lot of planning to keep the historical integrity of the buildings. If you can see, the buildings have not changed that much. Okay, moving on. So here's a copy of their agenda, and they meet once a month under the guidance of the Greenwood City County Planning and Zoning staff to conduct public hearings from citizens requesting permission for certificates of appropriateness to make alterations to buildings in either the old Greenwood Village or the Uptown Greenwood Overlay District. So if you could imagine a homeowners association that oversees any home improvement project or storefront signs, that is what the BAR does. A lot of people don't like that when people have to tell them what they can and cannot do with their property. So on the next slide, you see here, at this meeting, the BAR makes suggestions to update the Uptown Greenwood Overlay Zoning District. Okay, so that agenda is at their meeting, and that was the content of what their discussions were. Move to the next slide. So what you see here is a portion of their recommendation to City Council. If there are any recommended changings to the zoning ordinance or map within the historic overlay district, the BAR will forward their results of their deliberations by way of the planning department staff to City Council in form of a proposed ordinance. And as you can see to the right is their recommendations. So moving on with the Planning Commission, the Joint Planning Commission is a local body that makes recommendations concerning the physical, social and economic growth, development, and redevelopment of the community. Your next slide. All right. By South Carolina Code, the local planning commission has the responsibility to prepare and periodically revise plans and programs for development and redevelopment. The next one. And just as the BAR, the Planning Commission meets once a month under the guidance of Greenwood City County Planning and Zoning staff to conduct public hearings from citizens requesting permission to rezone their property. They also consider requests from staff to amend the zoning ordinance. So if you can imagine a citizen that's coming before the Planning Commission wanting to perhaps rezone their property, as you can see here, it's in a residential zone and they want to zone it commercial so that they can operate a grocery store. And so they would present that before the planning. All right. So after deliberating, their recommendations are forwarded to City Council once again via Planning Department staff in the form of a proposed ordinance for their consideration. So as you can see their agenda there and their recommendation. All right. So then lastly is the Joint Board of Zoning Appeals. So this is a local body that holds regular meetings on Monday of every month at 5:30 to consider and make decisions concerning appeals where it's alleged that an error in an order, requirement, or decision or determination made by the staff in the enforcement of the zoning ordinance. So going back to the BAR or the planning review, if a citizen has a problem with that, then they can make an appeal. So if appeals for the variance from the requirements of the zoning ordinance with strict application of provisions of the ordinance will result in unnecessary hardship and special exceptions as allowed within the zoning ordinance. Next. The board may give a variance in an individual case of unnecessary hardship if the board finds that there are extraordinary or exceptional conditions pertaining to a particular piece of property, and they give authorization of the variance will not be substantial or detrimental to adjacent property or for the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. The next slide. So here's an example, as you can see by their agenda, and there's a little dialogue to the right. Ms. Rhonda Yantz asked for permission to extend her peach stand on city property due to a late start because of COVID restrictions. This was last year. The board denied her request for a variance to extend her permission to vend at a spot for an additional 2 weeks. So the board is the final review authority for variances to the zoning ordinance. So the board and the zoning appeals do not go before the city or the county or any town councils. Appeals of the board decisions may be made to the circuit court. So they can take it all the way to court if they're not satisfied with it. So within 30 days of receipt of notification of that applicant is whenever they can attend. So, but in Mrs. Yantz's case, she did not go to court. She found a lot in the county where she can continue to sell her peaches. Okay, so the common denominator within all these boards and committees are citizens. Move the next one. Citizens elect city council. Next slide. And city council needs citizens to serve on committees to make recommendations. In return, their decisions are made to best affect the quality of life for its citizens. Next slide. So what does it mean to be on a board? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. City council and staff are looking for volunteers with a passion for their community. Most volunteers are required to live in the city. However, those who represent a certain profession or possess a skill are the exception, such as the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee, where we had people from the restaurant and hotel industry, or the Board of Architecture Review, where you had your lawyers, your realtors, your um, builders, and historical society members. Next slide. Because decisions nor recommendations can be forwarded to council without first having a quorum, an appointee must be committed to attend meetings and necessary training. Next slide, please. Although there is no salary to participate on these boards and committees, volunteers can get a sense of pride knowing that their civic duty help makes a difference in the lives of their fellow citizens. And again, I apologize for the snafu, but that concludes my presentation. I hope that it gives you an idea of municipal boards and committees.
Tiffany, thank you so much. And we are running just a little bit behind. We have one question, if we can answer it really quickly, and then we want to make sure that we can get into our panel discussion. And I think that Tiffany really pointed out that there are a lot of things that affect our everyday lives that are very important to us, that are decided by boards and commissions, and that a lot of things that you would never even expect would be regulated in that way are in fact decided by boards and commissions. So our question was, do you have suggestions for getting familiar with the language of board or commission recommendations and agendas?
First and foremost, I always say that you can always attend city council meetings. A lot of the decisions that are placed, or well, a lot of the agenda items are placed by staff recommendations. And again, the recommendations come from these boards and commissions. Um, Whenever we have an opening, we would post them online through Facebook or Twitter. And oftentimes it comes from word of mouth or within your neighborhoods whenever you see signs pop up that there's going to be a rezoning or an annexation, and people start asking questions. And that's where the dialogue comes in. And then from there, they say, well, why don't you attend the Board of Commission meeting? And they're all public hearings. So anyone is welcome to attend at any time, whether it be in person or nowadays from the past several years, it has now been open online.
Very good. So just reading over the materials, looking in on and participating in meetings. Very good. Well, Tiffany, I'm sorry to rush you through, but we really appreciate you being here. This was great information. Thank you for helping us get an understanding of some of the real specific things that boards and commissions regulate.
Thanks again for asking me to come and share.
Yes, ma'am. Have a great afternoon.